My Lords, this has been an historic debate in your Lordship's House. For the first time, a very large number of people have had the opportunity to listen to and watch the proceedings from their own homes. No doubt we should be told how many have actually decided to do so. Equally, there was much argument about the value of televising your Lordship's House. But surely few will dispute that the views and opposing arguments of noble lords who have taken part in the debate were worthy of a wide audience. And so I am sure that I speak for the whole House at this moment on thanking the noble Lord Mesick for his motion, for the scope of his motion, and indeed for his opening speech and the tone and character of it. I'm sure the House is very grateful to him for it. I would also like to congratulate the two maiden speakers, the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Birmingham, and the noble Lord Monkswell. The Right Reverend Prelate was a model, if I may say so, to him. I've made comments about the Most Reverend Primate before, which have gained some amusement and credibility in the press, and therefore I must be rather careful not to follow it by saying that the Bishop of Birmingham had shown a very high standard of ethics or something like that. But I think he did show a very considerable understanding of your Lordship's House in making a speech which was not controversial as a maiden speech and which did go into the background of much of the problems we are facing today in a very fair way indeed, and I would like to thank him for that speech this afternoon. The noble Lord Monkswell spoke with considerable feeling from his own experience, and that is always something, if I may say so, is very important to do. It would be impertinent for me, who has been in this House for such a short time, to say that that was something which our Lordship's House like. But I have learnt, even in this short time, that is something they do like. And so I hope we shall hear the noble Lord again in a similar vein. And indeed, I am quite certain we shall hear the Right Reverend Prelate again, but not necessarily in a similar vein. But we shall look forward to that as well. My Lords, it is my particular task in winding up for the debate for the government to try to refer to as many of the contributions that have been made in this debate as possible. Since I have heard nearly all the speeches, since I have been sitting in this House, I think, on end with two very short intervals for nearly 10 hours, I hope the House will understand if sometimes my notes are not adequate as they ought to be, or maybe as readable as they ought to be. But I shall do my very best to reply to as many of the points as I possibly can, and indeed as fairly as I can. Before I do that, I would just like to make one comment about the noble Lord's motion. It covers a great deal of ground. It is clear that what lies behind it is the desire for a united nation. And here I do think one is entitled to say that that is a desire that is shared in all parts of the House, and I believe that anyone who is genuinely in politics. I would never have spent the last 30-odd years of my life in politics if I hadn't had the desire for one nation in this country. I certainly wouldn't have spent all the time that I did fighting for this country in a war if I hadn't thought I was right to have one nation, and I certainly wouldn't remain in the government now unless it had the desire to have one nation. And I want to make that perfectly clear, and therefore I find some of the charges against the government and against me personally on one or two occasions as fairly offensive in all the circumstances, because I do not think they are charges which in any way are right, and I utterly refute them. My Lords, I think it is also fair to say that someone like myself, who represented the North of England constituency in another place for some 28 years, would certainly not acquiesce in a government approach which appeared complacent or unaware about the dangers of a north-south divide in our country. In fact, the government, I believe, can be shown to have acted with determination and success to tackle some of those very problems which have divided society in the past. In particular, our economic policy has focused on tackling inflation, which at the highest levels of the 1970s destroyed the savings of many who had worked to build them up over the years, and which hurt particularly the low-paid and those on fixed incomes. Wherever we sit in the House, whatever government we've been in, we were all responsible for various parts of those days of high inflation. All of us. We all know it, and we all know that it was divisive to our society. And many noble lords this afternoon have said that they regard the government's success as inflation as good and have given us credit for it. They may have criticized much else, but for that they have given us credit, and for that I believe we are entitled to take some credit. Of course, I now turn to the major argument about the action which should be taken in order to deal with the very distressing levels of unemployment in this country. It is fair to say, though no excuse, unemployment levels which are known in many other countries in the world at the present time. Nevertheless, they are most unsatisfactory for our country, and we have to do everything we can to deal with them. But the question that has been posed to your Lordship's House today, and many solutions have been put forward, have in the main come into two categories. Those who believe that action must be taken through more public spending, and those who believe that tax cuts, raising the threshold, will create more incentives and therefore in their turn lead to more jobs. Both arguments have right on their side. And I thought my noble friend Lord Thornycroft put the matter in very proper perspective, as he often does. And if I say that, it isn't surprising, because after all, I was his parliamentary private secretary 29 years ago. He did, in fact, put it into very considerable perspective when he said you cannot advance too far down either of those particular roads. And surely history has proved that to be correct. As my noble friend Lord Boyd Carpenter said, successive governments have tried the course, sometimes the easy course, as it would appear, of getting their way out of unemployment through high public spending. Alas, it has not led to more employment. It has led to rising costs, to loss of competitiveness in industry, and so to a loss of jobs. And, my Lord, surely we would then be deceiving ourselves, and far worse the people of our country, if we pretended that if tried again, this solution on its own, simply by increasing public expenditure as fast as one could, that in some way would provide unity and prosperity for our nation, when it so manifestly failed to do so in the recent past, where it has so manifestly failed to do so in socialist France, where the socialist government in France has had to give up that very policy themselves. But, my lords, that is not to say that there isn't a place for public spending. Of course there is. And my goodness me, if you look at what this government is spending, there can be no doubt that there is a considerable amount of public expenditure already. The noble Lord Chandos, waxed eloquent about the criticisms in some of the newspapers of the Public Expenditure Review this morning. But he didn't, of course, mention, because he didn't suit his case. I don't blame him. People don't mention things that don't suit their cases. But he didn't mention it. And, of course, there were many other papers who said the government was spending far too much, and that there was far too much public spending, and it was very dangerous in our present situation to spend so much. So there are two arguments there as well. I would claim that we have got to do both. I would claim, I would never suggest for one moment that it was right simply to go down the road of tax cuts alone, nor would I wish to see it done, and this I come to the noble Baroness, Lady Sear, at once on this, on the basis that you did not help those at the bottom end of the scale by increasing the thresholds, and that you simply made the rich richer. I believe it is very important indeed to get people out of the poverty trap. I believe it's extremely important, as she said, to seek to get people out of taxation at the bottom levels altogether. I think it is difficult to do so, as I understand it, without giving some reliefs at the higher levels at the same time. But certainly I take the point she has made, because she was very fair indeed on many other factors. And indeed, I did notice, and I will come back to this when I mention the noble Lord Chandos at the end, a certain divergence of view amongst the alliance. After all, the noble Baroness, the leader of the Liberal Party, said it was quite wrong to spend your way out of unemployment. And it was false prophets who suggested that. seemed to me the Lord Chandos took a different view. It seemed to me that the noble Baroness also believed in reducing the thresholds, increasing the thresholds, and helping tax at the bottom levels. It didn't seem that the noble Lord Chandos looked at it in quite the same light. But there it is. If you're going to form an alliance, you have got to get your act together, and no doubt that the alliance will be able to get that act together in the fullness of time. My noble friend, Lord Stockton, if I may come to a very serious point, mentioned the question as to how we were going to get into the third industrial revolution. I thought with his remarkable perspective of history, if I may say so with all humility to him, led us on the road to realize exactly the challenge that faces us. First industrial revolution, the second, and now the third. We have got to take advantage of it. And I believe that we would all accept that that is something we have to do. Certainly it was something that I know the noble Lord Gledwin, in his speech, in which I thank him for some of the support that he gave on different matters, although I had many criticisms to make, quite reasonably at the same time, that I think we all realize that that is something that we have to do. The question is, how are we going to do it? Again, I believe that the noble Lord, my noble friend Lord Orr-Ewing, mentioned that in fact we were attracting considerable American investment in the technology industries at the present time. And I think that my noble friend Lord Stockton would say that that was an extremely valuable thing for us to be doing. I believe the government, by its help for small businesses, by many of the other employment measures that it is putting forward and the help that it is giving in the technology industries, is seeking to go down that road and to give every encouragement to industry to do so. I believe that what we need to do, and I appreciate what the Lord Stockton, my noble friend Lord Stockton, says, is to do everything in our power to encourage that investment and to give every help to that particular development. And I'm sure he is right, and I am sure that is something which the government indeed must seek to do. The noble Lord Taylor of Gripe gave a speech about the nature of our society. I have a great admiration for his sincerity of purpose, but I don't altogether accept the road down which he wished to follow it as a result of that sincerity. But I do understand what he feels and what he means, and I understand very well, having lived near Glasgow for some part of my life, exactly what he says, and I share many of his feelings. The noble Lord Rowe was anxious about the divisions in our society and came to this point about concern about doctrinal rigidity. I have greatest respect for the noble Lord, who I've known in many capacities. Perhaps he would understand me when I say that I have, after all, been in cabinets and shadow cabinets of the Conservative Party now continuously for nearly 15 years. And I have to say that I do not find the cabinet that I am now in any more doctrinaire than the one that I was in 1970 and 1974. I do not expect that my right honourable friend, Mr. Heath, would necessarily accept that argument. But I have to tell you that I've been in both the cabinets, and quite frankly, I don't. I believe that cabinets on the whole are faced with so many difficult problems that come before them that they simply are not in a position half the time to take a doctrinaire attitude. They have actually to make up their minds on the facts that are put before them at any time. And I have found that both the cabinets I've been in have been doing exactly the same thing. So I don't really accept this argument about being doctrinaire. No one has ever, everybody has found everything wrong with me in the world during my political life except one thing. Nobody has ever suggested that I was doctrinaire. And if I don't think the cabinet is doctrinaire, well, I'm entitled to say it. But I certainly... the noble Lord Rowe raised the question of the position about America and our success compared to the American success. I'm sure he, from his banking standpoint, would agree that, of course, the whole American position, as far as attracting investment with the currency that it has and the number of people who deal in that currency, is in a very different position from our currency at the present time. We have to overcome some difficulties which they do not have. It doesn't mean we haven't got to do it, but but I think he would agree that they are, to some extent, different. My noble friend, Lord Boyd Carpenter, I have already mentioned on the question of doctrinaire and indeed about his points on public expenditure. He was generous in what he believed that the policy of the government, if we stuck to it, was the right policy to lead us into the third industrial revolution. That encouraged me, because I am most anxious to meet the requirements put forward by my noble friend Lord Stockton. And if I believe the policies are right to that end, as my noble friend Lord Boyd Carpenter said, that would be a great encouragement to me. The Bishop of Norwich said that he was an optimist in national life. I found that very encouraging. I hope that I could reciprocate that I was an optimist as far as my efforts, and very minor efforts, in his field in religion were concerned. I trust that I am. He, from his optimism, said that we had tackled inflation. He admired the youth training scheme, which has come under fire from some other people, so I'm grateful to him for that, and the employment schemes. The noble Baroness, Lady Ewart Biggs, talked about employment for women and the problems about employment for women. And I certainly note the difficulties which she set out. I thought she somewhat exaggerated them, if I may humbly say so, but I can quite see some of the arguments she put forward. My noble friend Lord Camoys, who I was delighted was able to take part in the debate, made, I thought, a very striking speech. He first of all started with the point, it was a sterile question of who cares most, and so I do so agree with him. It certainly is a sterile question. We all care. The question is, how are we going to give effect to that care? He pointed out that wage restraint in the past had been ineffective. He pointed out that the prospects today were moderately good, that the prospects for exports were good. And indeed, he praised the ideas of the small businesses and the advance on technology. He hoped that we would do better with standards in our schools, and I think that again is something which is extremely important for us in going into the technological revolution of the future. The noble Lord Carmichael, referred to many problems of the Scottish situation, and indeed of the human values concerned. I thought he was slightly a prophet of gloom, but nevertheless understood some of the points that he put forward. The noble Lord Ezra, asked me specifically about the recent Nedo report on the infrastructure. Some of the figures in the report, I think it is fair to say, are clearly exaggerated, and I don't think I can deal with them all in detail now. But in answer to him, and indeed in answer to the noble Lord Underhill at the end, I would ask them both to remember that total investment in the economy, public and private, is expected to run at some £55 billion in 1984, and it is going to rise further. I should have thought that was a considerable investment in both, and I would have thought that did give some of the answer to what was said about the Nedo report. Yeah. My noble friend, Lord Campbell of Alloway, was generally supportive of the government's policies. I'm afraid he was one of the speeches I regret I didn't hear, but I am grateful to him for the support he gave and for the points that he put forward. The noble Lord Halsbury, said that there was a very great difference between the inflation and unemployment situation in the 1930s and now. Today, we were facing unemployment in an inflationary environment, whereas before we had been facing unemployment in the 1930s in a very deflationary position, and that was very different. And he said, I believe very fairly, and gave support to the argument I put forward, that because we have unemployment today in an inflationary environment, you cannot spend your way out of it simply by increasing public spending on its own. The Baroness Fisher of Rednor spoke about social service spending, and I've noted the points that she made. Again, as with the noble Lord Carmichael, I thought she was incredibly gloomy, and I regretted that because I don't think perhaps that is necessarily her nature, and I don't know that she quite fully felt quite as gloomy as she felt it right to appear on this particular occasion. My noble friend Lord Ewing raised apart from making the point which I've already mentioned about attracting American investment, he made some very helpful points about training and employment measures. I am grateful to him for what he said about the value of these measures and for his proposals for particular help in the assisted areas. The noble Lord Ardwick, said that the Tory party had turned back on the Tory party of the past. Well, I seem to have been a member of the Tory party now, which has turned back on the Tory party before, and I don't notice it's happened, and I've been there, and therefore I don't actually accept it. The Bishop of Derby said he hoped that there would be constructive proposals from all sides. He said that he hoped there would be unifying policies for the mining dispute. I do say to him that I think it is very difficult for the government, because after all it is not the government that has caused the splits in the mining disputes. The government has made sure that those miners who wish to continue to work have been able to do so, and increasing numbers have decided to do so. In doing so, they have split from some of their other colleagues. That, I agree, from the point of view of the mining community and the miners' union, is very regrettable. But I do not think it would be reasonable for me to go further in explaining who I believe to be responsible for that at this hour of the morning. But I think it is perfectly clear that the responsibility must lie with those who have split the union. He said that the welfare state was near to breakdown. I must say I couldn't accept that argument, though I have to pay attention to the very important points that he made about his own area. My noble friend Lord McAlpine of Moffat made three very important points about the civil engineering industry, after which he knows probably, as so often in this House, someone knows more than everybody else about something, and he probably knows more about the civil engineering than any industry than most of the rest of us. And he says that, in fact, increasing activity there only gives a limited opportunity for employment, and I think we have to pay attention to that. He talks about more houses being obstructed by local authority, bureaucracy and planning. I think we have to pay attention to that. And lastly, he makes his point about backing our own British nuclear reactor instead of the American one, and I must simply pass that on to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Energy. I have known that view of my honourable friend. I think I better not say any more about it at this stage. The noble Lord Price Davies gave examples of some of the problems in schools and some of the problems in Wales, of which I have taken a very careful note. The noble Lord Wilson of Langside said we were very doctrinaire, and I don't think he is now here. Yes, he is here. Oh, I thought I was going to be absolved from saying anything about him if he wasn't. But I must apologise to the noble lord. He's most certainly here. He talked about the remould of the position, and he talked about the miners' strike. I have to say to him much the same as I said to the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Derby, and that is that it is certainly not the government who can be responsible for any of the divisive positions in the miners' strike. The noble Lord Stallard did talk a lot about training. I'm bound to say to him that I was involved in the 1964 Training Act as a very junior minister in that government, and I've known something of industrial training ever since. I didn't recognize many of the things that he said about industrial training at the present time. I don't think they are accurate, but I believe we have done a great deal to improve the training position, and that my right honourable and noble friend, my noble friend, Lord Young, has in fact is doing a great deal on this particular front. The noble Lady Saltown mentioned the various proposals put forward by the late Lord Spence, whose death we all so much regret. And she mentioned the idea of a commission on long-term employment trends, the Employment Protection Legislation and Wages Council being a bar to more employment, and she mentioned also about the new technologies. She also mentioned a hobby horse of my own. I'm not allowed to have hobby horses when I'm in the government, but if I wasn't in the government, I would have the same one as her about tolls on motorways. As I'm in the government, I'm not allowed to have it. The noble Lord Mackintosh of Harrogate talked about management techniques as far as the White Paper on public expenditure was concerned, and about the infrastructure and about training, and I certainly noted the points that he made. The noble Lord Banks came back to the position when discussing the welfare state, of which he is an acknowledged expert, on the whole question of American investment and the position of America. I think I must just say the same to him as I did say to the noble Lord Rowe. I think we have a different problem simply because their currency, for a wide variety of reasons, is very attractive to investment, and ours, of course, is not in the same category. The noble Lord Irving of Dartford started by not comparing like with like when he started discussing our position with America. I thought he drew, though I'm an old friend of his, I hope I may be allowed to say this to him, I thought because he started some false premises, he drew some wrong conclusions, which if you start from false premises, you're almost bound to do. And as a result, I couldn't agree with what he had said. My noble friend, Lord Harmer-Nichols, made some strong points in support of the government, and I am very grateful to him. The noble Lord Caldor eventually came out, I was waiting for it, with his policies which he's had for a long time and haven't found favour, both of import control and withdrawing from the European community. He will long proceed to put forward those policies. I do not think they will be accepted by any government, but I do not think he will be deterred in any way by that. The noble Lord Reid and raised the question of the management of the National Health Service. And indeed, at the end, the noble Lord Underhill also mentioned the National Health Service. And I just think I ought to remind them both that in actual fact, in England alone this year, we shall be spending some £13.5 billion in cash, more than double the £6.5 billion spent in 1978-79, and in real terms, an increase of 18%. Capital spending has also been increased, following a cut of 1/3 under the last Labour government. The result, 142 major new schemes are being designed or are under construction. Further developments costing over £1,100 million are also being planned. That doesn't sound like what the noble Lord Underhill, or indeed the noble Lord Rear, were telling us about. My noble friend, Lord Belloc, raised some very interesting points and gave some considerable support to the government's point of view, for which I was extremely grateful. The noble Lord Malloy had some delightfully amusing similes, which cheered us all up at a late hour. But he did say one thing which was totally incorrect. He kept on talking about Mr. McGregor as a foreigner. Well, as a fellow Scotsman, originally born in Scotland as I am, and Mr. McGregor was born in Scotland too, I think I'm entitled to somewhat resent the fact that an Englishman like the noble Lord Malloy should describe a fellow countryman of mine as a foreigner, because I do not think that he is. And I hope that he will realise that, in fact, Mr. McGregor is a Scotsman and not a foreigner. And I don't think I should give way, because Mr. McGregor is a Scotsman, and I don't think it can be denied. The noble Lord Graham of Edmonton talked about wages councils and raising the thresholds. I do think, about wages councils. I do think that the activities of wages councils, and indeed the poverty trap of the low paid, which needs the raising of thresholds, are points which I hope he will have in mind. My noble friend, Lord Delaware, spoke about long-term unemployment being with us for a long time, and he put forward various points for disregard for benefit and of the community programme. I'm extremely grateful to him. I'm extremely grateful to him for his advice to us to stick to our guns. The noble Lord Chandos, I think I've spoken about already. I had an enormous respect for his grandfather, and I hope in time I shall gain a sufficient respect for him. The noble Lord Underhill spoke about local government money. I just think one must remind him, in the relationship between national and local government, that the problems of local government money, so much of which is provided by the taxpayer, has been with us, by the central government, and so by the taxpayer, has not just arrived with this government. He will remember the late Tony Crossland, as Secretary of State for the Environment in the Labour government saying the party is over. And indeed, the party was over then and should have been over, and we are seeking to make sure that the party is over now, because some of that expenditure is very damaging. I have dealt with his points about the National Health Service. My Lords, I am afraid I have delayed your Lordships for a considerable time. I felt it was my duty to try and answer a very long debate with the fullness that it deserved. I hope I have been able to do so, and I hope I have convinced your Lordships, though I do not expect so, that in fact this government is on the right course and is determined to do what is best for a united nation.